In 1923, a German professor walked to his local bakery with a wheelbarrow full of money. Not to show off, to buy a single loaf of bread. Now here is the thing that most people miss about that story. The German government never missed a single payment, not one. Every bond was honored, every obligation met, every number on every bank statement stayed exactly where it was. But by the time those payments arrived, the money inside them had become worthless. The government didn't default, it did something worse. Last week, May 16th, Moody's stripped America of its last perfect credit rating, the first time in 116 years. And the financial media spent the entire weekend asking the wrong question. They asked, will America default? The right question, the one that actually determines what happens to your savings, is this: what does America do instead of defaulting? Stay with me, because the answer is not a theory. It is a 500-year pattern, and it has already begun. Now let me explain what Moody's actually measured, and more importantly, what it missed. Credit rating agencies measure one specific risk: the risk that a government fails to pay the number written on the bond. That's all they measure. They do not measure whether the dollars inside those payments are worth the same as the dollars you originally handed over. That distinction between the quantity of money returned and the value of money returned is the most important financial concept most people never fully learn. And right now, it is the only one that matters. At the halfway point of this video, I am going to show you a single number, a number that is already mathematically locked in by decisions that have already been made. A number so personally alarming that it will permanently change how you think about every dollar sitting in your savings account. Do not skip ahead, because the German professor didn't see it coming either. This is not the first time a dominant power faced the debt it could not honestly repay. It has happened before, multiple times. Different countries, different centuries. And each time, the government made the same choice. Rome, 3rd century AD. The empire's costs had outrun its tax revenues for decades. Legions needed paying. Borders needed defending. The treasury was empty. So Roman emperors did something elegant. They kept issuing coins, same size, same weight, same look. But they quietly reduced the silver content inside each coin, from 85% silver in 200 AD to less than 5% by 270 AD. They never announced it, never admitted it. The coins still said the same thing, but they meant something completely different. Britain. The British Empire enters the First World War with the pound backed by gold, the most trusted currency on earth. 4 years later, Britain had borrowed 11 times its pre-war debt. The gold standard was suspended. Sterling was quietly inflated. Britain didn't default on a single war bond, but the holders of those bonds received pounds that had lost enormous purchasing power by the time the payments arrived. Paid in full, in a currency worth far less. America, 1971. Nixon ends the gold standard. The dollar is officially untethered from anything you can hold in your hand. The inflation of the 1970s follows. Gold goes from $35 an ounce to $850. Anyone holding long-term treasury bonds loses 40% of their real purchasing power over the decade, not because a single payment was missed, but because the dollars inside those payments quietly shrank. Same pattern. Rome, Britain, America, 1971. 3 different centuries, 3 different empires, one identical mechanism. When the debt becomes impossible to repay honestly, they print. Here is where America 2026 diverges from every previous example, and not in the direction you want. The United States currently spends $7 trillion per year. It collects $5 trillion in taxes. That $2 trillion gap has to be filled every single year. But here is the number that stops most people cold when they truly understand it. America must refinance nearly $10 trillion of existing debt in the next 24 months alone. $10 trillion. Debt that was borrowed at near zero interest rates in 2020 and 2021 must now be rolled over at rates between 4 and 5%. That is not an interest rate. That is a trap closing. Interest payments on U.S. debt already exceed $1 trillion annually, more than the entire U.S. defense budget. The Congressional Budget Office projects those payments will reach $1.3 trillion by 2030, consuming 22 cents of every dollar the government earns in revenue. Now add the political reality. Spending cuts large enough to actually matter are politically impossible before any major election. Tax increases large enough to close a $2 trillion gap do not exist in the current legislative environment. And foreign buyers, China, Japan, the Gulf states, are already quietly reducing their treasury purchases. When voluntary buyers pull back and the gap still needs filling, there is only one buyer left, the Federal Reserve. And when the Federal Reserve buys treasury bonds, it does not use money it saved, it creates new dollars. And every new dollar created dilutes every dollar already in existence. Quietly, invisibly, legally. This is not default. This is the thing that is worse than default. I promised you a number. At the current trajectory, the trajectory that is not a projection but a mathematical extrapolation of decisions already made, the United States will carry $50 trillion in debt by 2035. $50 trillion. Put that in personal terms. Your family's current share of the national debt is approximately $230,000. In 10 years, at this trajectory, it rises to approximately $425,000, nearly double. That additional $195,000 per family must be financed through some combination of borrowing and money creation. And the dollar that finances it is the dollar sitting in your savings account right now. The dollar has already lost 25% of its purchasing power since 2020 alone. In 5 years, 25%. The numbers in your account did not change. The value inside those numbers quietly disappeared. The German professor's wheelbarrow happened suddenly. The American version happens slowly until it doesn't. Now, here is something that almost every financial commentator completely missed in their Moody's coverage. On the exact day Moody's downgraded America's credit, gold hit a new record high. Not the next day, not the next week, the same day. Gold surged to $3,245 an ounce the morning the downgrade was announced. The 30-year Treasury yield hit its highest level since 2007. Think about what that means. The market looked at the Moody's announcement. The first time in 116 years America lost its perfect rating, and immediately moved money toward the one asset that has no government behind it. Not because they fear America will miss a bond payment, because they understand exactly what the government will do instead. Central banks globally purchased more gold in 2024 and 2025 than at any point since 1967. Not retail investors, not speculators, central banks. The same institutions that hold and manage the world's reserve currencies. They are not buying gold because the system is fine. They are buying gold because they know what the system does when the debt becomes unpayable. They have seen it before. They are Rome's senators, quietly acquiring land while the emperors clip the silver coins. Now, the question most people ask at this point is, why doesn't the government just fix it? It is a fair question, and it has a precise answer that economic history gives us every single time. Genuine fiscal discipline, the kind that would actually close a $2 trillion annual gap, requires one of three things. Cut spending by an amount that triggers immediate economic pain and immediate political revolt. Raise taxes by an amount that no modern democratic government has ever successfully passed. Or allow inflation to quietly erode the real value of the debt over time. Option 3 causes pain too, but it spreads that pain invisibly across millions of people over years in a way that no politician ever has to vote for. No press conference is held to announce that your savings lost 3% of their purchasing power this year. No politician stands before the cameras and says, "We printed money to pay our debts, and you absorbed the cost." It happens in the background, in the silence between headlines. In 500 years of recorded economic history, across Rome, Byzantium, Ming China, revolutionary France, Weimar Germany, and post-war Britain, every dominant power that faced unsustainable debt chose option 3. Every single one, without exception. Not because their leaders were evil, because it was the only option that didn't require anyone to admit what was actually happening. So, here is what the Big Cycle framework says about the position you are in right now, and specifically what to do about it. The Big Cycle tracks 6 stages of empire: production, wealth accumulation, financial innovation, debt expansion, currency debasement, conflict, and transfer of power. America, by the observable data, 120% debt to GDP, $1 trillion in annual interest payments, reserve currency share now falling toward 57%, sits in Stage 5. Stage 5 is not the end, but it is the stage where ordinary people who are not watching lose the most. First, understand what you actually hold when you hold long-duration treasury bonds. You hold a promise, denominated in dollars, a promise to be paid back in the same currency that the government controls the supply of. If inflation runs at 6% and your bond pays 4%, you are not earning 4%. You are losing 2% every year, on schedule, in full, silently. Second, the structural gold allocation exists for exactly this stage, not 50%, not all in. The all-weather framework targets 10 to 15% in gold held as a structural position, not a trade. The distinction matters enormously. A trade is something you buy when you think the price goes up and sell when you think it peaked. A structural position is insurance against the mechanism, the debasement mechanism that operates whether you are watching or not. Gold did not go to $3,245 because investors got excited. Gold went to $3,245 because institutional money, the money that has read the pattern before, is building structural positions before the next wave of debasement. Third, shorten duration on bond exposure. Treasury inflation-protected securities, TIPS, adjust their principal with inflation automatically. They don't eliminate debasement risk entirely, but they don't let the government pay you in shrinking dollars without acknowledging the shrinkage. That distinction is the difference between what an ordinary saver held in 1971 and what they should have held. Fourth, recognize that European stocks outperformed American stocks by 23% last year, Chinese stocks by 21%. That is not a story about European or Chinese economic strength. That is a story about global capital rotating away from dollar-denominated assets, quietly, structurally, before most retail investors noticed. The rotation is not complete. The Moody's downgrade will fade from the headlines within days. Markets will recover. Politicians will say the fundamentals are strong. Financial commentators will move on to the next story. But the $50 trillion trajectory does not move with the news cycle. The $10 trillion in debt that must be refinanced in the next 24 months does not wait for a convenient moment. The $2 trillion annual gap does not close because the headlines have shifted. What happened to Rome happened over 70 years. What happened to Britain happened over a generation. What happened to the 1970s American saver happened over a decade. In each case, the people who lost the most were not the people who made bad investments. They were the people who made the safest, most reasonable investment available to them and trusted that the currency inside that investment would hold its value. They were right about the investment. They were wrong about the currency. The math of debasement does not negotiate. History does not make exceptions, and the pattern does not care whether you were watching. Debate Trigger plus Series T's, 9:45 to 10:15. Here is the question I want you to sit with. If America cannot default because it controls the printing press, and if printing money transfers purchasing power from savers to the government, then who actually pays the $50 trillion bill? Not who pays it officially, not who signs the legislation, who actually absorbs the cost. Is it your parents, whose savings are already deployed in dollar-denominated bonds? Is it you, whose retirement account is priced in the currency being diluted? Or is it your children, who inherit an economy rebuilt around a currency that has already absorbed the cost of the transition? Tell me in the comments exactly who you think absorbs this. Not the most polished answer, the most honest one. I read every comment. The best analysis gets featured in the next video. In the next video, we are going to follow the money that is already moving. Not gold, not tips, not international equities. The one asset class that no financial commentator is discussing right now, that the big cycle framework points to as the final store of value when reserve currencies enter their terminal phase. Subscribe now, because by the time it is obvious, it will already be expensive.